Good afternoon. Bruce Whitfield, there you are. Hello, I'm Stephen Grootes. Welcome to our webinar, and we are talking to Bruce Whitfield. He is the author of the book, The Upside of Down. Before I go anywhere, Bruce, you and I have been given strict instructions to behave ourselves. Are you sure you got that the right way up? And then
This
second...
This is the book, by the way, just in case you're wondering.
Right.
I'm sorry, the instructions were what?
Our instructions were to do two things. One, to behave, because I don't know if you realize this, but there is no actual regulation on a webinar. There's no broadcast complaints company of South Africa. The second thing is to thank Pan Macmillan for sponsoring this webinar. So before I go any further, Bruce Whitfield, the author of The Upside of Down, good afternoon to you. How are you, and how's local radio these days, by the way?
Local radio, Stephen, is ruling the airwaves, as the data will show in the months ahead, of course. But it's lovely to see you. It's lovely to be on this webinar for you. I believe this is your first, so I will give you a virtual hand holding through it. But let's cut the slush, so to speak, and get straight into the meat and potatoes of our discussion. You have an appointment after this. Everybody who's logged into this, as charming as they may find us, would like to learn more about the book. Remember the book, Stephen. It's all about
the book. It was Pan Macmillan, right? It was them. So Bruce is very good at selling things. He does a business show. Okay, fine. Let's get going. You've interviewed a whole manner of business people over the years. You've watched Warren Buffett give a presentation. You've endured Sir Richard Branson more than once. You've spoken to all of our top business people over the years. Some of them enjoyed it, some did not. What do they all have in common? They all have something in common. What is that?
They are relentlessly optimistic, and not optimistic in the Pollyanna-ish sense of the word. They are people who are able uniformly to look through crisis, look through chaos. They are people who are able to take advantage of crisis and chaos. They are, by nature, opportunists. They are the sort of people who pounce when others are not ready to pounce. They are the sorts of people who, in a calm and calculated way, armed with facts, and armed with a very good sense of who they are and what their own businesses are about, able to navigate the rest of the world when most of us simply could not. We get so caught up in our own prejudices, in our own biases, that we see the downsides. And generally, people I've spoken to have been successful in business, whether they are captains of industry, companies they haven't started but are stewards of, or people who are entrepreneurs, people who've started their own businesses, whether they be people like Richard Branson, who clearly have lots of disdain and who's going through really tough times at the moment with Virgin Atlantic and other of his businesses. They are people who are relentlessly optimistic, whether you talk in South African terms about Aspen Pharmacare, or whether you talk about Discovery, whether you talk about ShopRite, whether you talk about Bidvest and many other large corporations. But there's a new generation of young, thriving, enthusiastic optimists who are building the next generation's great businesses. And they are also featured in the book.
Is there something about spotting the gap? And I'm always been interested in, there's a lot of sort of research into this. I mean, there's all of this American research about who forms a business in the Wharton School and blah-de-blah-de-blah. And then someone like Warren Buffett will come along and just do what he wants to do and make it work, right? Or Bill Gates will invent something. But I know there's some research that suggests the people who are most likely to actually start a business are immigrants or the children of immigrants. That first generation of people who grow up in a country but are brought up by someone from another country tend to be quite successful, but they tend to be quite successful in starting a business. And there's something there about spotting the gaps, understanding society, seeing something that other people don't see. I mean, does that point to something? There's a different understanding. They see something that other people don't, or they just sort of shake the ball and look at it in a different way.
I think South Africa may be slightly different in that regard. I mean, the sort of research that you're referring to is probably mostly American research, because they're a nation of entrepreneurs. I mean, there is a fabulous book written by a man called Alan Beatty called False Economy, and he compares the societies at the turn of the 19th century of Argentina and the United States. And there was a huge sort of outpouring of people out of Europe at that time going into Argentina and the United States. Argentina tried to replicate the social structure infrastructure of Europe at the time, mostly Spanish and Portuguese sort of colonial infrastructure, whereas people who were getting out of the United Kingdom, who typically went to North America, people who came out of Italy, wanted to break away from the constraints of those sorts of rigors. And they set up a more entrepreneurial society where there was a more of a colonial society in Argentina, and how those economies have diverged since then. Argentina is still very much a top-down society, whereas America is very much a society of entrepreneurs. In South Africa, I'm just thinking as you go through, and I'm not too sure who is a direct descendant of an immediate immigrant. Many of South Africa's Jewish business leaders have been descended from places like Lithuania and others. And I'm not too sure necessarily that that's been as defining a factor in South Africa. What's uniform in South Africa is that how people have become problem solvers. It's one of the founders, Yuri, could be Levine, Israeli founder, co-founder of Waze, said at the 2018 Sunday Times Top 100 Companies Awards that you make a lot more money out of solving misery than you do out of creating comfort. And certainly South Africa's great entrepreneurs have focused considerably, and the new generation of entrepreneurs are focusing on building solutions to problems. Because if you want problems, I don't know if you've looked around you recently, but South Africa is problem central. When we just look at the vast inequality in our society, when we look at the huge problems, now most of us see the problems and we go, oh, problems, we must fix the problems. People who are entrepreneurial go, problems, excellent, let's fix the problems. And in solving those problems, they create business opportunities for themselves and potentially, in the cases of so many of the guys who started businesses, and generally they have been male entrepreneurs, structural reasons of all sorts of other societal pressures, but they have created tens of thousands of jobs, many of these people out of one bright idea.
Are there people, so people who've come along, you've interviewed when they're sort of quite young, which basically means older than you and I, so, 30, and you think this guy's got something, and then a few years later you've been able to see, I told you so, and actually what you have is a situation where you can almost spot younger people, or is that actually not possible? Sometimes I find that, every newspaper does the bright young things. Drives me nuts because actually success is a long.
You've never been on the list, that's why.
Only twice. but it's a long game, and people forget that. They forget that actually often it's someone, the overnight success is someone who's been stocking at it for 10 years. He's got his $10,000.
Absolutely. I mean, there's only one individual who's ever had the gumption to come and not only tell me, lots of people, you'll get it on your social media feed saying, Stephen, one day you're going to interview me, I'm going to lead the ACDP or whatever other big political ambition they might have. Certainly lots of people approach me and say, one day you're going to introduce, I can hear your voice in my head saying, introducing me and talking about my business. And that's a lovely ambition, and it's most gratifying, and it's a huge compliment for somebody to be saying, what, that would be a really nice thing to happen to me. But about 7, maybe 8 years ago, I was at one of those end of year Christmas parties. Those when your kids are really small or you don't have kids yet and you can still go out in the days when we could socialize. It was BC, before children, absolutely. And when I went to a Gibbs Christmas party, probably the end of 2013, and having a great time, that beautiful campus at Gibbs in Sandton. And this young woman comes up to me and she goes, I was at university with your nephew. And well, that's nice. She goes, and you're going to interview me soon. And I went, of course I will. Have another glass of Chardonnay. And 2 or 3 years later, I was talking to Stacey Brewer about a brand new private school that she started. It was just a single campus in those days in Randburg. And people talk about the lost decade in South Africa. People talk about the Zuma years as being this drought, but like we talk about the dark ages in which nothing happened. A huge amount happened in Europe in the dark ages. A huge amount of innovation and technological innovation and societal innovation happened in those dark ages. Just because we had Jacob Zuma and his friends stealing R1 trillion from South Africa in that era does not mean that there wasn't a huge amount of vigor and enthusiasm and entrepreneurial activity in South Africa. One of those people, and I talk about her in the book, is Stacey Brewer. who from that single school in Randburg, where she built it for about 2 or 3 years before it started spreading, and has got to, before this crisis, to 15 campuses, to 1,000 teachers, to, no, it's 21 campuses, 1,000 teachers, 15,000 kids being educated. This year, opening the first senior school in the Spark Schools network, because the kids that had started in primary school needed a senior school to go to. And this is a woman who's developing and has delivered education in a private context at roughly the same price as government spends per child in South Africa, with outcomes that are considerably better. So much so that people like Anyaza Kusupi, whom I know you know, is very keen in the model, and she's very keen to share the model. And it's a blended learning model. It's using technology, it's using classrooms, it's using computer labs to help advance kids, and testing kids constantly and rigorously to see who's going ahead and who's falling behind, to ensure that by the time you get to the end of a school year, you're able to go to successfully promote the kids and get the best out of the kids, and stop treating kids like idiots, and stop treating children like they're dumb, and saying, by the end of grade 1, you need to count to 10. Well, actually, how about 100? How about having some ambition for kids in society? And Stacey Brewer is one of those people. So yes, she's one of those great young entrepreneurs. The moment you meet her, yeah, I don't know if she's one of the many, many bull dusters, or whether or not she's got something. I suspect she's got something, and she most certainly, and still has, as she plots the course for the future of Spark Schools.
It's interesting. The other day, well, a couple of years ago, I remember at a Daily Maverick gathering, Dr. Martin Davis, you'll know him as well, of course.
Yeah.
Lectures at Oxford from time to time, spent a lot of time in Asia, really sort of South African expert on China, if you like. And he sort of made the point, he was asked, what could possibly get us out of our economic trouble? Poor man. I mean, a doctorate and Oxford education isn't enough to answer that. And he said that actually the one thing we do have, which other people don't have, is something about the DNA of building business. You're talking about SAB as an example. There are others, of course, who've done pretty well overseas. There are some who haven't recently. But do you think there's something in that? Is there something about the problems, the difficulties of being a business in this country, that actually really do help people go on to become really great CEOs and build other businesses that then in the end straddle the globe? Or is he just being optimistic?
No, I think there's a huge amount of truth in it, and I think a lot of people believe that truth, which is why we have so many people burning their fingers when they go global. And we've seen hundreds of billions of rand, probably trillions of rand. Nobody can quantify it, by the way, because I went to every asset manager I know to say, have you ever done a calculation of just how much money has been peed up against a global wall? When you look at Old Mutual, the last time I looked at the numbers for Old Mutual, for example, they'd spent 100 billion rand on their global expansion, buying insurance companies that no American wanted to buy in North America, and they bought global businesses across Europe, a company called Scandia. They ended up unwinding all of that and coming back home, only then to have a big fallout between Peter Moyo, of course, and the board of Old Mutual, and that is ongoing. But Old Mutual is probably the textbook case of how to get it wrong, and that is because we have this enormous self-belief that we believe, because we've built great businesses in South Africa, of course we can do it anywhere. There are countless examples of South African companies that have gone to Australia and have been sent packing, not for Perth, but packing back to Pretoria, if you like, because they simply bit off more than they could chew. So many companies have gone into the United States. There was an insurance company before your time, perhaps, called Sage, which died in America. Discovery went into America, started something called Destiny Health, burned through 1 billion rand before coming back to South Africa and refocusing and focusing on the local market in South Africa. SAP was the great South African success story. And actually harkens back to the original, the genesis, if you like, of this particular book, because I was in a pub in Manchester, and I swear it was only one beer, and it was a pint of Boddingtons. And I stepped out into the mid-afternoon, late autumn gloom of Manchester, so it's 3 o'clock in the afternoon, just marveling at the number of beer taps on the counter in this particular pub, of which there were 6 or 7, maybe 8 There were beers that were brewed by S.A.B. Miller, whether it was Tyskie from Poland or Ursus from, where was that one from? I think that one was from Hungary. But there was also Foster's in there. There was Pilsner Urquell. There was Grolsch and a bunch of others. And I was marveling at all of these beers brewed by this little company that starts in the dusty streets of Johannesburg in roughly the same week that the mining starts in Joburg with Charles Glass. And there's a number 2 Jan Smuts Avenue until the world opens up, with the Berlin Wall coming down and the opportunity that was presented by Eastern Europe and for South Africa, newly out of apartheid, to take advantage of many African beer markets as well. And no sooner was I contemplating the marvel of this than this Bidbest Food Services truck comes trundling down the road past me. And I think to myself, that's weird. There's a Bidbest logo on a truck in Manchester. And as it disappeared down the road, there was the Nando's logo blinking in the sort of late afternoon. And I just think to myself, there's something magical about entrepreneurs in South Africa, people who have built great businesses in South Africa, who have been able to make those businesses go global successfully. But there's also a sense of exuberance, perhaps over-optimism, perhaps huge arrogance that is bred in South Africa. It makes everybody think that, hold on a second, we did it here, so we can do it elsewhere. And so many companies have burned through billions of rands of shareholders' money, and your my money, by the way, because by our retirement annuities or whatever pension funds we might have, it is our money. They've burned through it in this absolute rush to get out the door. We've got to have hard currency earnings. I mean, Famous Brands, for example, has reported results out this morning. They went to spend 2 billion rand on buying something called Gourmet Burger Kitchen. I tried a Gourmet Burger Kitchen just before New Year. It was awful. The service experience was atrocious. The food was fine, but the experience was lousy. It's no wonder that they're cutting ties with it, and they're hoping to sell it to somebody, but I don't know if anybody's going to buy it. But that's 2 billion rand, just Famous Brands. Lovely guys, lovely idea, charming, but ultimately deeply flawed, because so often sellers see South African CEOs coming. South African CEOs are being pressured not only by their own shareholders, by their boards, but sometimes their own staff. Laurie Dippenard, one of the founders of First Rand, tells a story that whenever somebody came in and said, you know what, we really do need to open up an office in, whether it be Salzburg or Berlin or Perth or Brisbane, his first question was, which executive wants to go and live there? Because generally these things are fueled by the personal ambitions of executives who are seeing it as a passport to greener pastures. And so often South African companies really badly burn their fingers, and by extension, all of us.
Bruce, we've got 1 or 2 questions, I'm afraid, about the sound quality coming from your end. I think it might be...
it's just the way I sound, I'm afraid.
I don't know if it's your microphone, if you can sort of maybe give it a bit of space so it doesn't quite get... So,
there we go. I was trying to be fancy and hide it away, but clearly by hiding it away, my manly rippled chest was pushing it against... Okay, yes, sorry, it was rustling. I apologize.
That's all right. Welcome back to FM, Bruce. Sorry, ancient history. I do need to ask, why did you write the book? Now, when I wrote a book, I hated this question because I really only wrote it because I wanted to sell it. And if someone had told me that selling it is about 2/3 of the job of actually doing it, I don't know if I would have. But there is even before COVID, and we'll talk about sort of life after COVID just now, but even before COVID, there was plenty of reason to be sort of down, which presumes that, you know, it's very, very timely. There's a lot more down around now than there used to be. So why did you write it? Was it because the stories are important? Is it because there's something about optimism or sort of looking ahead that's important? Is there something about the nature of business people that you almost want to bottle and put in a book?
I was bored, and not in the way that you think, that I had nothing better to do with my time. I was bored with the narrative. Can I use that word? I think it's only a political word, but the narrative. I was bored of the story. I was bored of the story of going to people's houses, lovely people, with lovely intentions, but the same conversations time and time again. Everything is bad. It's all going to hell in a handbasket. It's all a disaster. The focus relentlessly, and I blame political reporters primarily for this. People like
absolutely.
but it was the one-dimensional story of South Africa, which does nobody any good. And it was all sparked. I mean, yes, that visit to the pub in Manchester came a couple of months after Nhlanhla Nene got fired, and South Africa was truly on the brink of its own self-destruction. And it got me thinking about why it is that we feel so negative about our own country, why it is that we feel so negative about our own environment. And I think it was a kind of a catharsis to go through a process and say, okay, let's go through our history and let us find how many times we've been to the brink, we've stared over the edge of the brink, and we've gone, you know what, not today, and we've pulled ourselves back. And you can go through countless periods in our history, whether it be Sharpeville in '61, whether it be the Rivonia trial, whether it be the Verwoerd era, whether it be the oil crisis of the early '70s, the Soweto uprising, the P.W. Botha era, my goodness gracious me, the 1980s, of state of emergency after state of emergency. I mean, they call it a low-level civil war, but my goodness me, it was a grotesque time in our history. And South Africa truly was at the brink, and we get to the deep uncertainty at the end of the P.W. Botha era. FW declared its decision to release political prisoners and to unban political parties, and truly take a huge chance on South Africans' better nature and say we have to muddle through this thing because there's no money left to keep fighting apartheid, even if we wanted to, from a National Party perspective. So let us see what happens. And you let the genie out the bottle. And what happened was nothing short of miraculous. This decade and a half of extraordinary growth being reintroduced to the global economy, the extraordinary opportunities that brought, the huge amount of enthusiasm and positivity that brought, the jobs that were created. Yes, it was also the period of beetroot and garlic and African potato and the lunacy of that, but it was also a period of expansion and opportunity. We then hit the Zuma era at the same time as we hit the global financial crisis, and we get this double whammy, of course, of negativity. The first Zuma era is bad but not disastrous. We have the World Cup in there, which helps us grow at about 3.5% in 2010. That's the last time we get any sort of level of potential creation growth. And after that, we just start dwindling. We start losing our own sense of value and our own sense of self-respect. And we start going into this real quagmire of negativity. And South Africa becomes a gloomy place to live, even if you have means. I mean, there are so many indices and tests that are around the world which say to you, South Africa, being one of the most unequal societies on earth, is also one of the most miserable societies on earth. And even wealthy people were miserable, and wealthy people started looking for other options. And so the genesis of this was to say, hold on a second, it can't all just be one-way traffic. In this environment, there is incredible stuff happening. In this environment are remarkable people that respond in incredible ways to the toxicity of the environment. And in doing so, they not only improve the environment for themselves, but they create opportunity for others. They create jobs. They start paying taxes. They start creating tax-paying citizens. And if we can somehow bottle that particular bit of magic, that points to a solution, as Martin Davies dared to suggest to you a couple of years ago, that does create hope in an environment. And that has been hugely derailed in the COVID-19 environment, where businesses simply can't survive 2 months in lockdown. As we are seeing, businesses are falling over all over the place. We all know people who are losing businesses, and it is tragic because it's not only those livelihoods that are impacted, but it's the huge dependency networks in South Africa that come out of those too, which are severely at risk. And somehow we have to find the magic sauce. And it's not just a Nando's sauce, although they've got a good recipe. But we have to unleash that entrepreneurial zeal in South Africa in a way that Abraham Patel doesn't try to constrain.
Are you wearing a T-shirt under that jacket?
It's not cold enough for me, Stephen. Not cold enough. I only wear T-shirts under my jackets when it is cold enough to do so.
So it's interesting because you talk about that time, and someone, I will never forget a conversation around about the time that Nhlanhla Nene was fired in December 2015. A political leader, someone who's older than you and I, imagine such a thought, with vast experience, simply asked me, where was I during the Rubicon speech? And I said, well, I was at school. Bruce, I presume, was at, I don't know, university. And he
I was still at school. Only just still at school.
And he said, I remember being, and he was in a very, he was a young man at the time, and he said he was with a group of friends, and they all said, this is the end, we're in real trouble now. And he was the only one in his group who said, this is the beginning of the end of this and the start of something new. And he was right. And I've often wondered about Nene, Nasric, COVID now, if that could be the case. I'm going to let you sort of chew on it because we're going to go to some questions. I've got to tell you, the comments here are a lot better than Twitter, by the way. So one person is saying, Onga, thank you. Stephen, stop touching your face. Sorry. Okay. Other people.
No, Stephen, keep touching your face. Please touch your face.
I really shouldn't make that joke. It's terrible. Bridget Malone, you may remember. Hello, Bridget. Is there a political psychology that affects entrepreneurship in South Africa? And I think there's going to a deeper question about our politics. And I know, Bruce, once you and I start discussing politics, we'll probably never get off it. But there is, it's sort of part of your word narrative that there's something to do with the politics, with the political culture. We spoke about Ibrahim Patel, regulate, etc. That maybe has something to do with constraining business. And I would say, as my opening comment, that if there's one thing the ANC's failed to do for the last 15 years, and I have written this is uncontroversial, it has failed to agree on an economic policy because its range of constituencies is simply too wide. Comment.
I couldn't agree with you more. And I mean, one of the biggest problems, of course, is that the ANC is so determined, despite its ineptitude, to put itself at the center of the economy. It wants to control the economy, where it has shown itself to be completely incapable of doing so. We can go through 950 state-owned enterprises, and we can tick them off one by one. There are a handful that are functional, that work well, and they are by and large ones that are left alone to their own devices because they're too small and too inconsequential or too hard to corrupt to make it worthwhile to have any political intervention in. So if you're going to put yourself as a government at the center of the economy, that's all well and good. You can say we want to be more like China. Well, then you have to be good at it, and you have to be competent, and you cannot be promoting people without any meritocracy. You cannot be promoting the lowest common denominator of ineptitude because it suits your particular political agenda to have your friends in influential spaces. We've seen the Zuma decade. We've seen the consequences of that. We're living with the consequences of that. Cyril Ramaphosa is trying to hold the country together with bits of sticky tape and bubble gum, and he is doing it with a completely incapable state behind him. And that has got to be the biggest wake-up call for the African National Congress. If it hasn't yet got it, it's coming its way thick and fast. And we're going to undercollect on taxes this year about 250 billion rand. I know it's not part of your pastime to go through company results, but it is part of mine. And you know what? None of them are going to make any profit this year. And you know what that means? It means that they are not going to be paying any corporate taxes. And corporate taxes as part of the overall haul of taxes is fairly small, about 16%. But still, that's 16% of government revenue mostly gone because companies are simply not going to be reporting profits. Also, companies that aren't reporting profits have to make themselves look as good as possible, have to window dress as well as possible. So they start laying off people. They start cutting down on office space. So there is a consequence there immediately. PAYE, which is the most essential part of our tax collection, it's about 25% of all taxes, simply drops off a cliff as people lose their jobs and more people become dependent on social grants. More people go with a handout to UIF, which at the moment is paying out about 10 billion rand a month. With a 140 billion rand kitty, that's all they've got. In 14 months, that money runs out. Probably less because more and more people are going to join the unemployment queue. What then? So government's got to catch a blimmin' fast wake up and realize that billionaires are useful, rich people are useful. You don't have to like them, but you do have to be able to free them up to do what they are good at. And what they are good at is creating opportunity. And if you create opportunity, you create jobs. You create jobs, you create taxpayers. You create taxpayers, you create revenue. You create revenue, you could then support the huge number of people who tragically in South Africa are left outside of the formal sector and do need your help. What are the famous quotes? I think that's your dog, not mine. The famous quote from Ronald Reagan, the 11 scariest words in the English language. I'm from government and I'm here to help you. In South Africa, those are the scariest words.
Bruce, we're beginning to lose you on the sound there. I'm going to ask you just to log back in if you can. If you can just log in because we lost you on the picture.
If I don't come back, Stephen, you're on your own. Bye.
Thanks. Okay, Bruce Whitfield has disappeared. He will be joining us again in a moment. Sorry about that. We do have lots of other questions coming through. I do want to ask Bruce, well, of course, about COVID-19, how it changes the economy. Is there any sort of reason to be optimistic during this time, or is it actually just complete disaster? Are we going to still be talking about life pre-COVID and post-COVID? I mean, is life, 2018 going to be the good old days? Was that how it's going to work? So we are expecting to Bruce Whitfield coming back in just a moment, but I was losing sound on here completely. We've got quite a few questions.
Oh, Stephen Grootes has now left the room. Okay, Stephen Grootes has joined the room. This is all good and positive. Stephen Grootes, are you with us? Earth to Stephen Grootes. This is where it gets exciting. We start pushing buttons we probably shouldn't push. I thought it was quite funny, and I'm not too sure if you are still with us, but I thought it would be quite funny just to leave Stephen hanging for 20 minutes and see what he would do, because that would amuse me no end, and I'm sure would amuse you. But it's not funny to be left in a room with 679 people. Thank you very much to those of you who have joined us to be watching us. Stephen Grootes is also looking to join the room. Rebecca Davis has now joined the room. That's a vast improvement, by the way, on the previous guy. And as we talk about the book, The Upside of Down, and those who have joined us, to be watching us. Stephen Grootes is also looking to join the room. Rebecca Davis has now joined the room. That's a vast improvement on the previous guy. And as we talk about the book, The Upside of Down, and those who have joined us, to be watching us. Stephen Grootes is also looking to join the room. Rebecca Davis has now joined the room.
Exactly, but also just one day.
Upside and down.
Bruce, can you hear me?
I can. Is that Rebecca Davis?
It is, Bruce. I'm just stepping in for.
Oh, she's stepping in for Stephen and then left the room, but Stephen's back, and I can see you. And we've only lost 8 people. So carry on, Stephen.
I'm so sorry about that. Okay, all sorts of things. All right, great. Some great questions coming through. I do want to sort of try and get through to them. Okay, various questions. Just the sort of usual things about just trying to get Bruce going. Just trying to sort of get questions and just trying to hear sort of what what kind of questions they are for you. A lot of them are about after COVID, right? So let's talk a little bit about sort of after COVID. I made the comment earlier that when you wrote the book, there was a lot of down. There's a lot more down now. There are some people, and I know 1 or 2 have asked, if you've got any money to invest, is there any space that you put it? Do you put it into the webinar sense? Do you put it into Daily Maverick or Pan Macmillan? Do you put it into Zoom? Where do you put any capital that you have? And I must say, I sort of am under the impression, slightly cynically, that the people who had a little bit of capital going into this are probably going to actually be in a stronger position after this if they keep their capital, because so many people are going to lose theirs.
Unfortunately, I don't fall for the trick of making big projections on where to put money, because inevitably you just upset people in the long term because they lose theirs. And being a journalist, and I don't have any capital of my own to risk, because we go into this thing on the bare bones of our backside, and we emerge, we hope, still some bones to speak of. But yes, universally, crisis has created empires, and it's those that capitalize on crisis who build the best empires. Those empires could just be the family empire. It could be the opportunity that you see in a family business. It could just be the fact that you manage in a process like this to re-establish control of your personal finances because you've never had more time at home, and you actually revisit the insurance policies, and you actually go and shop around because you didn't ever have time to do that because you were in your car half the day going from meeting to meeting to meeting. And that's an empire building all of its own as you get control of your life at a time like this. And if you're not using this time for that, then you're going to regret it later. Also, the time to invest, absolutely. But the time to invest, frankly, when you look at a time like this, and I'm not going to give you companies or sectors or anything like that, but I firmly believe, based on history as well, people have invested in themselves at times like this, either in educating themselves a little bit better. And I mean, imagine if this lockdown had happened 10 years ago with a cranky internet, with online schooling and education not nearly as evolved and developed as it is, just how much worse it would be. But there is a South African company it emerged out of UCT that is based in Woodstock, Cape Town, that it's, I don't know, the choreographer, if you like, of global online education. It's called Get Smarter, and it's been brought out by a big US company. But there's 600 people who are now working from home, but have been until about 2 months ago based in the big office in Woodstock, an old factory in Woodstock. And from there, they coordinate global education programs for teachers at Harvard and in many other parts of the world. And they're thriving in this environment, as are so many others. And there will be huge opportunities that emerge from this crisis. I don't know what those opportunities are going to be. I'm not that entrepreneurially minded. But there are thankfully thousands of other people who are spotting opportunities and will seize on those opportunities. For those of us with a more Calvinist upbringing and more conservative outlook on the world, we hope to hold on to our jobs and hope to be useful in other ways. But there will be people who will find ways to muddle through the crisis.
All right, I think the problem might be on my side, so let me continue. Antonia is asking this, Bruce. The word crisis literally means turning point of a disease. I didn't actually know that, Antonia. You say it's a great chance to reset. How do we create an environment where this is allowed to happen? The biggest gift in South Africa is diversity, our young nation, and our vibrant, beautiful country. We'd love to discuss green, tech, and other new reimaginings. And I wonder if there's a little bit of a sort of romance about what could happen, and maybe not enough cynicism about what could happen on the other side. Maybe we need to find a sort of, the right way through that conversation. It's quite tempting to say, well, nitrous oxide is down 47%. This is the beginning of a new clean revolution. Actually, it might not be like that at all. We might find people using resources as quickly as they can so someone else doesn't get them.
I suspect you're right. I'm afraid your cynicism in this particular field, Stephen, I think is spot on, because nothing has made my heart more glad than seeing little fishes swimming about the canals of Venice and wild boars taking a walk through the streets of European cities. And there was even a kudu in part of Pretoria the other day, I think just near one of the big nature reserves in the middle of Pretoria. And it's all lovely, and it's all like, oh, we'll all get back to nature. That's very nice. Well, I have little animals coming and running through my garden, and it's lovely. But the only reason they're doing it is because we're all stuck at home. The moment midnight on the 31st of May, I suspect people are going to go joyriding just for the hell of it because they can, depending, of course, on the regulations that, of course, as Anna Tlamini announces tomorrow. But people are going to want to get back to normal as soon as possible and make up for lost time. So I think, yes, the planet has had a wonderful breathing space. Yes, the planet has given us this opportunity for a reset. Do I think we're going to take it? I don't think we're going to take it. I think we're going to revert to our bad habits really, really quickly, because we're going to need to, because we have been set back so badly by this. This economy is going to contract by anything between 7 and 12% over this year of 2020. It becomes the second full year of full-blown recession that we have seen since 1994. It is a really tough environment. It is a difficult environment, and we need to get it restarted. Is this going to be the restart of green energy? Well, we hope so, but that's up to Gwede Mantashe, isn't it? I mean, Gwede Mantashe is the guy who holds the keys to the green energy revolution in South Africa. But then you got Private Gordon at Public Enterprises, who's desperately keen to preserve Eskom. And Eskom, sitting with a 450-odd billion rand debt burden, has got a vested interest in keeping as many players out as it can. And so for all of the goodwill and the good intention and the desire to make the world a better place and the warnings that the planet is sending us, I fundamentally believe that us as humanity don't have sufficient EQ, and perhaps we're not even desperate enough yet to respond to that particular crisis, because that crisis of confidence in the economy and the immediate pain that so many people are feeling is something that is going to be overbearing when it comes to the decision making of the future. Yes, it would be lovely to have green energy and green this and green everything else, but I'm not too sure that as humanity we're prepared for it, unless of course it can wash its own face, unless of course it becomes better than the establishment. If it doesn't become better than the establishment, then we're a long way off. And that, I suppose, is the challenge to the green industry, that it is going to simply have to be better at doing its work if it wants to be relevant in the 21st century. So humanity, Stephen, you missed a whole bunch of that. Humanity is going to revert back to type, and if anybody wants to make the world a better place, it needs to do it competitively.
Here's a question that I think you'll really like. It's all right, Bruce, you were talking, I missed nothing. Ashraf Carter, old friend of mine. Ashraf, hi. Great insights, Bruce and Stephen. Thank you, Ashraf. How do we create a culture of champions? I know this is something that's very, very close to Ashraf's heart, to create a culture of champions and growing champion businesses. He runs actually a movement called Champion South Africa. Is there something that you need to do to kind of build those champions? I mean, some people are born, but some people are also sort of made in a way. It's about, and all of the sort of social stuff will come out. You need an enabling environment, very important. There's a reason why racialized equality is generational. But is there something about creating a culture of champions that's quite important? To say to younger people, you actually can do this and you're going to do this. And it's actually up to you to do it, but you can and must.
Who are our heroes in society, Stephen? I mean, I know you would have had aspirations. I mean, you're a big cricket fan. You would have loved to have been a Proteas cricketer. You would have loved to have been, you're a muscly kind of guy. You would have loved to be a Springbok rugby player. And your heroes growing up as a kid would probably have been sports people. Other people's heroes might be actors, poets, and artists. So whatever the case is, what we don't have in South Africa is a culture of heroes in business. We tend to have a very strong tall poppy syndrome in South Africa, where we tend to tear down and cut down people who are enormously financially successful. We look for excuses to tear them down. Oh, they've had to retrench 1,000 people. They're all evil. They're all bad. Well, what they're trying to do is preserve their businesses to fight another day, potentially. So I would like us to herald successful business people as people who should be examples in society. And if you go all Marcus Jooste on us, then we tear you down, we throw you hopefully one day in jail, and not just in the too distant future. But we've got to be acknowledging the huge success of people who create businesses, people who create opportunities for others. And I don't think in society we pay nearly enough tribute to those sorts of superheroes. It takes a hell of a lot to start a business. It takes even more to keep it going. In the good times, you reap the rewards, but in the tough times, you have a huge burden of responsibility on you. And there is not one single executive I'm talking to today who is relishing the prospect of cutting back and trimming back and finding ways through this crisis, because they know it comes at enormous human cost. But I don't think that we hear those stories nearly enough. Often it's because the people who are at the forefront of this thing don't want to be seen as vulnerable. They're ego-driven in many respects. They want to be seen as the big, tough individual in this environment. But if we could tell more stories of business superheroes in the same way as we tell stories of sporting superheroes, political superheroes, which some people aspire to be, I think then we'd go a long way to creating an environment in which it would be cool to do maths and science and accounting. Okay, maybe not accounting, but maths and science, yes. But for people to go out and set up their own businesses, it must be cool to be an entrepreneur. It's got to be cool to create opportunity for others. And those with the intellectual capacity can then be set free to exhibit those tendencies and to create businesses.
There's such a funny thing that happens in our national conversation where people are, you can do entrepreneurship at school now, right? And
who teaches that, Stephen? Who teaches that? The same people who are teaching phys ed, and they may be very good phys ed teachers, but they're not necessarily the best people to be teaching that. Yeah.
It would be people who taught, I think, guidance. So what you have is, you have on the one side people saying, everyone be an entrepreneur. We need more entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs create jobs. And on the other side, you have, I'll call it business bashing. Business is responsible for this. Business must do this. Business is evil. There is actually a sort of dual message that comes out. That's actually quite complicated, I sometimes think. I sometimes think that the anti-business stuff, and I get it. I mean, I understand, sometimes businesses behave terribly, and you've mentioned Steinhoff and Marcus Jooste and all the rest. And I mean, we all know he's never actually going to account. We know he isn't. And yet, all of that feeds into a conversation where people are actually sometimes just fed up with business, or they feel that business is wrong, because the point that is not made often enough is that business is what actually gets government money. Business pays for schools, it pays for hospitals, it pays for all of that.
Completely. I mean, you're speaking to the converted here, but I mean, business has always been the bad guy. I mean, there was a character in 1930s, popular cartooning, and cartooning was a very strong political tool in the same way as the great Shapiro does it on Daily Maverick. There were cartoonists who referred to Hoggenheimer. Hoggenheimer was this rotund, probably Jewish, certainly white, English-speaking captain of industry. And Hoggenheimer was this greedy, voracious beast in an environment in the Great Depression that was really, really hard to deal with. And business has always been teed up as the bad guy, and quite often, frankly, deserves to be teed up as the bad guy. If you look at the way the bankers behaved up until 2008, 2009, the way many business people do behave, they have, the game of making money does get the better of them sometimes. But again, it's a balancing act, isn't it? Not all politics is bad, not all civil society is good, not all business is all good, and it's certainly not all evil. But what options do we have unless we can unleash the magic of the entrepreneurial zeal, the desire to take risks, the desire to take capital, and rather than go and put it in an offshore jurisdiction, whether it be to go and buy the S&P 500 or the NASDAQ or the FTSE 100 or the DAX or the Dow, whatever it might be, you say, I'm going to invest money in a startup. A friend of mine was with a bright idea. Let's risk it on my friend who I trust more than life itself. Well, let's get my friends to risk me. I mean, when Raymond Ackerman bought 4 little stores in Cape Town called Pick and Pay, he'd just been fired from his job working for Greatermans, who in those days owned Checkers, because he was too entrepreneurial. He thought differently from them. And he went to 20 of his closest friends and said, I've got an idea. I need 600,000 Rand to buy these 4 stores. Will you back me? And they did. And many of them became incredibly wealthy as a result, because Raymond Ackerman was a hard-working kind of guy, in the same way as Anton Rupert is reputed to have gone around the winelands of the Western Cape in the 1930s and have gone from farmer to farmer to farmer to say, I want to create a global cigarette empire, which he did, and that has now morphed into one of the biggest luxury goods suppliers in the world, run of course, by Johann Rupert. And so, backing smart people to do smart things really has to be our way forward. If we're not prepared to do that, then the country is in trouble, and certainly this government is doomed.
Okay, a couple of questions coming through. I almost said on the SMS line, listen to me. Taryn, hello Taryn, she's asking very nicely, pretty please. Can we talk about impact investing and social bonds? How do we invest locally and with real communities on the ground in mind? And I mean, on the one side...
Short answer, I don't know, Stephen. Taryn, ask somebody with a brain. Ask Stephen.
I mean, what's so interesting about that is that there are so many people who've lost a ton of money, right? People, I mean, can you imagine retiring in sort of April 2020? You'll have lost a ton of money. Everyone's going to try and sort of get it back. And where I'm going with this is that investing is a long-term game. So do you have at all a kind of 5-year, 10-year prediction? In other words, people are going to get money back? Is this the beginning of it all? Is it the end of it?
I dare not make a prediction. What I will, however, do is tell you a couple of stories about what history teaches us about investing, and will remind you from one of my favorite quotes from John Maynard Keynes, the great economist: in the long term, we're all dead. So we can't be banking on the long term. Again, what is long term? So again, the world will recover. And stock market history teaches us. If you look at long-running graphs of stock market history, it's all in the trials and tribulations of human history. Markets have always recovered. Investments have always recovered. Some industries have died. Some sectors have fallen away. Some investments have turned into absolute dogs. But overall, markets are the best way of eradicating those that don't deserve to live. It's quite Darwinian in its approach, actually, because if you cheat, if you lie, if you're corrupt, if you're incompetent, you do get ejected. Unlike politics, where that sort of activity, unfortunately, seems to be a national pastime, almost a prerequisite for success. But if you look at a 100-year graph of the Dow Jones Industrial Average, 1929. Features, but it's a tiny blip on an otherwise very strong upward trajectory. It did take 25 years for the Dow Jones Industrial Average, which was around 400 on the day the Great Depression is deemed to have started and fell all the way down to 40, so lost 90% of its value. It did take until 1953 for it to return to the level of 400. But ever since then, its growth has been quite stratospheric. As societies evolved, as industries evolved, as businesses evolved, as consumers have had more money through thick and thin, trials and tribulations, through warfare, through disease, through pestilence. The last couple of decades, for example, here's a game we can play, Stephen, because it's going to put you on the spot. So if you'd invested, if mom and dad Grootes, or your grandparents for them, had invested 1,000 Rand on the all-share index of the JSE on the day that Hendrik Verwoerd, there's a political connection for you, just to make it achievable for you, on the day Verwoerd took South Africa out of the Commonwealth in 1961, what would that R1,000 be worth today?
Absolutely no idea.
I'm going to go make a
150
cup of tea. 150 million rand. Now, you see, when I ask this question, I invariably get two sets of answers. One very low, or one outrageously high, because people think it's a trick. How dare you think it's a trick? But it would be in the region of about 7 million rand today. And that is simply because we had hyperinflation during the 1980s and we've had huge growth. But South Africa's stock market doesn't begin to move until 1994. Not really. The exponential growth comes as South Africa opens up to business. And South Africa's business environment is allowed to compete globally. We start seeing imports, we start seeing exports, we start seeing South Africa's commodities become in global demand. And we start seeing the sort of exponential growth curve in the value of investments coming through the 1990s and into the 2000s. We've flatlined, of course, in the last 5 years or so. And what is required is a business-friendly environment, policy environment. When I was in Davos at the World Economic Forum, I know you've been there as well, I was in a room with investors and the South African government. Tito Mboweni was leading the delegation there. He'd been to an Africa Investor Conference days before in London. But the financial director of Heineken was in the room, and they've got a big brewery in Sedibeng, and they see that as a beachhead for the rest of Africa. They want to take on the brewers of Africa, the Castelnau family, which is very, very big in French and Francophone Africa, and of course then AB InBev, which bought the African assets of SAB Miller. And they see South Africa as this opportunity, this bridge to get into the rest of the African continent. However, she says, you know what, your policy uncertainty, the lack of electricity really hurts us. And I found that a very human emotion from a financial director. And simply because we make it so blooming difficult for people to come in, that so often we actually bizarrely encourage the monopolies that Abraham Patel is so critical of. And he is desperate to try and discourage monopolies, but at the same time, South Africa's business environment is so tough and so really difficult to break into and to be successful in because of the huge constraints that are put upon business in South Africa with massive pools of regulation, that quite often it leads to a solidifying of established positions within our economy. A guy I know bakes biscuits for a living. And he goes, Matt, the business environment's great because once you've managed to navigate it, once you know your way through the morass, then you know that there's not going to be any competitor sort of nipping at your heels because it's blooming difficult to do. And so it immediately actually helps exacerbate inequality because what you're doing is you're keeping bright, young, smart entrepreneurs out of the system because you're requiring them to do the dreaded red tape. And I certainly don't have patience for that, and I know you wouldn't have patience for that either. But it is bizarre in that all of this regulation, all it succeeds in doing is actually stifling opportunity. So sadly, it's one of the things that we have to do is get rid of so much of the junk that accompanies the politics of the country.
One of the things that you say in some of the excerpts from your book is you almost seem to be saying that our economy and life isn't actually fair. You almost seem to be saying we should give up on the idea of sort of complete equality and basically get the economy going. Have I quoted you accurately?
I think you've got it. I mean, there's no way that you get complete equality. I think that's la-la land. Sure, you can get complete equality. Venezuela is a lot more equal today than it used to be. You can have that if you like, but I'm afraid I'm not prepared to go down that particular slippery slope. We can have Zimbabwe's equality if you want, but I think on average, nobody's better off under those sorts of circumstances. So, I mean, would you rather have no job or a first job that allows you to get a second job? And a second job that prepares you for your third and fourth job, that allows you for a lowly management position, that prepares you hopefully for a bigger management position that, if you're smart enough, allows you to be in charge one day. Nobody has a chance if they don't get the first break. And that's what the Yes campaign is all about, the Youth Employment Service. And I mean, Tashma Ismail, who was instructed by the president to create 1,000 jobs within 3 years, and I think is 2 years into the project, has tens of thousands that she has connected with job opportunities. But it's very, very difficult to create anything out of thin air. You've got to unleash the power that you have in your society, the energy that you have in your society, the brain's trust in your society, and allow them to create the opportunities. And from that, you will generate corporate taxes, personal taxes. You will have a better society. Yes, it will, at least in the short term, be incredibly unequal. Of course it will be. But that inequality, there should be a virtuous cycle that accommodates that and draws people up through the economy. It simply has to work like that. I don't see another way, I'm afraid, other than equalizing all the way down.
One of the interesting questions that's come through is from Paul. You say the problem with the old normal was just that it was old and it was normal. Old and normal is not the platform for growth. I can see you're agreeing.
I think so. I mean, we certainly have to think innovatively. I'm working on lots of different ideas at the moment in terms of what do I want to hold from this crisis? What are the good habits I've generated? And I have one or two in the last 2 months. And what are the things invariably that I'm going to then switch straight back to? My bad habits, the chasing airplanes, chasing deadlines, going to meetings, sitting for hours in rooms full of people that I don't really care about, or having meetings with people I really shouldn't. And I'm going to refine the way I run my life, certainly. And I hope that we all have learned some very valuable lessons from that as well. Because we can have these sorts of interactions. It's not really as satisfying as seeing you in the flesh. And of course not. You know, the joy of being in a room where people are engaging with each other and nodding and agreeing, or disagreeing and being angry, and you can then engage directly and say, well, why does that statement upset you so much? If I say South Africa is not just unequal, because unequal makes it seem like, you know, it's inevitable. If I say to you it's unfair, then it forces you to actually do something about it. Some people may find that offensive, and I hope they do. But you want that sort of vigorous debate to happen, which is harder over a platform like this than it is in person. So, yeah, I think, you know, the new normal is going to be much of the same, but hopefully evolved in a way that just makes us work smarter than we have up until now.
Bruce Whitfield, the author of The Upside of Down, thoroughly enjoyed talking to you for the last while.
Is this the book? Is this the book, Stephen? Is this one? How chaos? It's this one. How chaos and uncertainty breed opportunity in South Africa. It's incredibly good value, and even Uber Eats will deliver it to you, because I know you haven't read it, but you did a marvelous job, by the way, of bluffing your way through an entire 45 minutes of discussion with occasional breaks just to catch up with your notes. We know you didn't have connectivity.
Bruce, you and I could probably do this for another 3 hours, actually.
Yeah,
really nice to talk to you.
Even. No one cares.
Indeed. Our thanks to Pam Macmillan, who, of course, published the book, The Upside of Down by Bruce Whitfield. So thank you. Thank you very much indeed for watching. Sorry for the technical glitches. And really nice to talk to you. Bruce, look after yourself. There'll be more on Daily Maverick. Of course, I'm going to go and do my afternoon job, which is News from Africa. Bruce, do you have an evening job still?
I do, believe it or not, and I have to go on to ENCA in just 35 minutes. So if you haven't had enough of this, I'll be talking to Jeremy Maggs on ENCA with a clear signal in a few minutes.
Channel 405 News from Africa from 3 o'clock.
Oh, look, sorry, can't hear you. Bruce
Whitfield, cheers. Good to talk to you. Bye.